You have no right to gain weight in this marriage. Those were the exact words my husband said to me as I stood in our bathroom, fresh out of the shower, vulnerable and exposed. Not "I'm concerned about your health." Not "let's work on this together." Just a cold, calculated statement about my rights, or lack thereof, in our marriage. I'll never forget the way he looked at me that morning. Like I was a broken appliance he'd been tolerating for too long. Like I was a bad investment that had depreciated beyond acceptable limits. The man who once traced every curve of my body with reverent fingers now stared at me with the same disgust you'd reserve for spoiled milk. But what he said next, that's what broke me, and ultimately what saved me. "I've already handled it," he announced, scrolling through his phone while I stood there dripping and humiliated. "Gym membership starts Monday, nutritionist appointment Tuesday, and I found you a therapist who specializes in eating disorders. You clearly need professional help." He'd planned my entire rehabilitation without asking, without discussion, without even the courtesy of pretending I had a voice in my own life. That's when I realized this wasn't about 15 pounds. This was about power, control, and the slow, methodical destruction of everything I thought I was. Little did he know, I was about to become someone entirely different, someone he definitely didn't see coming. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before everything unraveled. My name is Sarah, and 3 years ago, I was that woman who believed fairy tales could come true if you just loved hard enough. David swept me off my feet during my final year of graduate school. I was studying psychology, ironic, considering how blind I'd become to my own situation. He was everything I thought I wanted: successful, charming, the kind of man who opened doors and remembered your favorite coffee order. He worked in corporate finance, made 6 figures, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners and weekend getaways. He'd surprise me with designer dresses that fit perfectly. "I have a good eye," he'd say with that confident smile. He'd pick restaurants where he knew the chef, order wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and somehow make me feel grateful for the privilege of being chosen by him. I should have noticed the patterns then. How he'd gently steer me away from ordering pasta because "you want to look amazing in that dress tonight." How he'd suggest we skip dessert because "we both know you'll regret it tomorrow." How he'd buy me gym memberships as gifts and seem genuinely hurt when I didn't use them enough. But I was in love, and when you're in love, you rationalize everything. You tell yourself he cares about your health. You convince yourself he's helping you be your best self. You ignore the tiny voice in your head that whispers he's trying to sculpt you into someone else entirely. The wedding was perfect, at least, that's what everyone said. I'd lost 20 pounds for the big day, following a strict regimen David had researched and planned. In our photos, I looked radiant, glowing, exactly the bride he'd envisioned. But I remember feeling hollow inside that dress, like I'd carved away pieces of myself to fit into his version of perfection. Our first year of marriage was the honeymoon phase, literally and figuratively. David was attentive, affectionate, proud to show me off at his work events. I played the role of the perfect wife, maintained my wedding weight, kept our apartment spotless, supported his career ambitions without question. I even changed my research focus to corporate psychology, thinking it would help me understand his world better. But life has a way of testing your carefully constructed facades. My mother was diagnosed with cancer that second year. The treatments, the hospital visits, the emotional exhaustion, it all took a toll. I found comfort in late-night snacks while working on my dissertation. I skipped workouts to spend time with Mom. I gained weight slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. David's reactions were subtle initially. A raised eyebrow when I reached for seconds. Comments about how stress eating was unhealthy. Suggestions that maybe I should take a break from thesis writing to focus on self-care, which, in his vocabulary, meant getting back to the gym. Then came the morning that changed everything. Mom had passed away 2 weeks prior, and I was drowning in grief. I'd gained maybe 15 pounds over 6 months, not dramatic but noticeable. I was stepping out of the shower, vulnerable and raw from crying, when David delivered his verdict with the cold precision of a corporate termination. But here's where the story gets complicated, because there was something I hadn't told David. Something I'd been hiding since our wedding day. You see, While he was busy monitoring my calorie intake and scheduling my life, I'd been conducting my own investigation. It started innocently enough. I wanted to surprise him for our anniversary, maybe plan a trip to his hometown. But what I discovered in his old photos, his college records, his carefully curated past, made me realize that the man I'd married was living a lie. David wasn't the successful, naturally confident man he pretended to be. He was a carefully constructed persona, built on insecurities so deep they made my weight gain look like a paper cut. And the more I dug, the more I realized that his obsession with controlling my body wasn't about love or health, it was about power. About maintaining the illusion that he was the kind of man who deserved a perfect wife. The question was, what was I going to do with this information? The gym membership started on a Monday. The nutritionist appointment was Tuesday. The therapist was scheduled for Wednesday. David had orchestrated my entire week of rehabilitation, like a military operation, complete with a detailed schedule he'd printed out and stuck to our refrigerator. But it was Thursday that broke me completely. I came home from my first therapy session, where I'd spent 50 minutes trying to explain to Dr. Martinez that I wasn't actually suffering from an eating disorder, just grief and a controlling husband, to find David in our living room with someone I'd never seen before. A woman. Beautiful, thin, perfectly put together in the way I used to be. "Sarah," David said, not even bothering to look embarrassed, "this is Rebecca from my office. She's going to be helping me with a special project." Rebecca smiled at me with the kind of pity you reserve for sick animals. "David's told me so much about you. I hope you don't mind me saying, but you're so brave for getting help. It takes real strength to admit you need professional intervention." Professional intervention. Like I was an addict hitting rock bottom instead of a grieving woman who'd gained 15 pounds. That's when I noticed it, the way Rebecca looked at David. The way she touched his arm when she laughed. The way he lit up around her in a way he hadn't with me in months. This wasn't a work colleague. This was his replacement. He'd already found her, probably been seeing her for months, and now he was parading her in front of me while I was at my lowest point. But the real devastation came when I overheard them talking in the kitchen while I was supposedly taking a shower. I doubled back to get my phone and caught every word through the thin walls. "How much longer do you think this will take?" Rebecca asked. "Not long," David replied. "She's already broken. A few more weeks of this routine, and she'll probably ask for the divorce herself. Then I won't have to be the bad guy, and I won't have to pay as much in alimony." "You're brilliant," she purred, making her think it's about her weight when it's really about clearing the way for us. The best part is, she actually believes I'm trying to help her. She has no idea I've been documenting everything, her emotional instability, her weight gain, her inability to maintain our lifestyle. My lawyer says it's perfect evidence that she's not fit to receive significant spousal support. I stood there in the hallway, naked under my bathrobe, listening to my husband systematically destroy my life while his mistress cheered him on. This wasn't about my body. This wasn't about health or love or concern. This was a calculated campaign to break me down so completely that I'd walk away from our marriage with nothing. The gym, the nutritionist, the therapist, they weren't meant to fix me. They were meant to create a paper trail of my problems. Evidence that I was unstable, unhealthy, the kind of person who needed professional help just to function. David was building a case against me, and I'd been unknowingly helping him do it. That night, after Rebecca left and David retreated to his office to work, I sat on our bathroom floor and cried until I had nothing left. I looked at myself in the mirror, 15 pounds heavier, eyes swollen from grief and betrayal, spirit crushed under the weight of his manipulation, and I realized something that would change everything. I wasn't broken, I was awake. For the first time in months, maybe years, I saw the situation clearly. David hadn't fallen out of love with me because I'd gained weight. He'd been planning his exit strategy long before that, probably since before my mother got sick. The weight gain was just a convenient excuse, a way to make me feel like I deserved what was happening to me. But here's what David didn't know about his broken wife. I'd been keeping detailed records too. Not of his fictional concern for my health, but of his very real deception about who he was. All those late nights when he claimed to be working, I'd been working too. digging into his past, his finances, his carefully constructed identity. And what I'd found was going to destroy him far more thoroughly than he could ever destroy me. David thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. He had no idea I'd been playing an entirely different game all along. While he was busy trying to break me down, I'd been building something he couldn't even imagine, a complete picture of the man behind the mask. The question wasn't whether I was going to fight back. The question was whether I was going to show him any mercy when I did. As I stared at my reflection that night, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I was done being his victim. It was time to become his worst nightmare. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. David was already gone, probably meeting Rebecca before work, as I now realized he'd been doing for who knows how long. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, I sat down at my laptop and opened the file I'd been building for over a year. David Williams, successful finance executive, confident leader, the man who'd swept me off my feet, didn't exist. At least, not the way he'd presented himself to me. The real David was Daniel Kowalski from Buffalo, New York, a man who'd legally changed his name, fabricated his college transcripts, and built his entire career on a foundation of lies. The prestigious university he claimed to have attended. He'd been a part-time student at a community college. The impressive job history. A series of mid-level positions he'd exaggerated into executive roles. Even his age was a lie. He was 4 years older than he'd told me, which meant he'd been calculating this deception since before we met. But the piece de resistance was what I'd found about his finances. While he'd been living like a successful executive, spending lavishly on our courtship and wedding, he'd been drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, loans from his family, even money borrowed from his company's expense account that he'd been carefully repaying to avoid detection. The man who'd married me for my potential had actually married me for my trust fund. The inheritance from my grandmother that I'd never touched, never even mentioned to him directly. But David had done his homework. He'd known about it from the beginning, probably seen it as his ticket to financial freedom. And now, with Rebecca in the picture, he was trying to get rid of me while keeping as much of my money as possible. The systematic destruction of my self-worth wasn't just about making divorce easier. It was about making sure I felt so worthless that I'd accept whatever settlement he offered. I stared at the mountain of evidence I'd compiled, bank records, employment verification, even a recording of a conversation I'd had with his former colleague who'd confirmed my suspicions about his fabricated resume. I had enough to destroy him completely. To expose him at his job, ruin his relationship with Rebecca, maybe even get him criminally charged for fraud. My finger hovered over the send button of an email that would go to his boss, his colleagues, Rebecca, even his family. One click, and David's carefully constructed life would crumble just like he'd tried to make mine crumble. But then I stopped. Sitting there in the silence of our apartment, I realized something that made me physically sick. I was becoming him. Calculating, manipulative, ready to destroy someone's life with cold precision. I was so focused on revenge that I'd turned into the very thing I hated about him. Was this who I wanted to be? A woman who fought manipulation with manipulation, who answered cruelty with cruelty. I closed the laptop and walked to the bathroom mirror where this had all started. The woman looking back at me wasn't the broken victim David thought he'd created. But she wasn't the vengeful destroyer I'd almost become either. She was someone in between, someone who'd been hurt but didn't have to hurt back. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of destroying David, I was going to give him something he'd never expected, a chance to be honest. I spent the next hour crafting a different kind of message. Not an exposé that would ruin his life, but a letter that laid out everything I knew about his deception. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move he'd made. But instead of sending it to his boss or Rebecca, I left it on his pillow with a simple note. I know who you really are, Daniel. The question is, do you want to keep being David or do you want to try being honest for once? We need to talk. Sarah. When he came home that night, I was waiting in the living room, no longer the broken woman he'd left that morning. I wasn't seeking revenge anymore. I was seeking truth. The look on his face was worth more than any revenge I could have plotted. Pure shock, followed by fear, then something I hadn't seen in months, actual emotion. Sarah, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I interrupted. You're very good at explaining things, but this time I want the truth, not your version of it, not what you think I want to hear, the actual truth. He sat down heavily, and for the first time since I'd known him, David looked small, vulnerable, human. Why? I asked. Why me? Why this elaborate lie? And then he said something that cut deeper than any insult about my weight ever could. Because I thought if I could just be successful enough, confident enough, perfect enough, maybe I could deserve someone like you. But I was never enough, was I? Even when I tried to make you perfect too. The revenge I'd planned would have destroyed him. But this moment of honesty, it destroyed us both. Because in that admission, I saw the broken man behind the mask and realized that understanding his pain didn't make mine hurt any less. What happened next will probably shock you, because it shocked me too. David didn't just confess to his lies, he confessed to everything. The affair with Rebecca had been going on for 8 months. The plan to document my instability had been Rebecca's idea, something she'd learned from her own messy divorce. Even his obsession with my weight wasn't really about control, it was about his terror that I'd discover the truth about his finances and leave him before he could secure my trust fund. But here's the twist that changed everything. As David sat there crying, telling me about his childhood poverty, his father's abandonment, his desperate need to be someone worthy of love, I felt something I never expected to feel again. Pity. Not the kind of pity that excuses behavior or justifies pain, the kind that recognizes brokenness without absolving it. David had been hurt, yes. Abandoned, yes. Desperate to be loved, absolutely. But so had I, so had millions of people who didn't respond by systematically destroying their spouse's self-worth. I understand why you did it, I told him, my voice steadier than I felt. I understand the fear, the insecurity, the need to control everything because you felt so out of control inside. But understanding doesn't equal forgiveness, David. And it certainly doesn't equal staying. The divorce was swift and surprisingly amicable. David's guilt, combined with my evidence of his deception, made him surprisingly generous in the settlement. Rebecca had already left him. Apparently, she'd been attracted to successful David, not broken Daniel. His job was safe because I chose not to expose him, but our marriage was over. 6 months later, I ran into David at a coffee shop. He looked different, older, more tired, but somehow more real. He was with a woman who wasn't Rebecca, someone who looked kind and genuine in a way that made me think he might actually be trying to be honest this time. Sarah, he said, and I could see the shame in his eyes. I just wanted to say. Don't, I interrupted gently. We both know what happened, we both know why it happened, that's enough. As I walked away, I realized something profound. Revenge would have felt good for a moment, but it wouldn't have given me what I really needed. Understanding his motives didn't make me forgive him, but it did help me forgive myself for loving him, for trusting him, for not seeing the signs sooner. The real victory wasn't in destroying the man who tried to destroy me. It was in refusing to let his brokenness break me permanently. It was in choosing to walk away with my integrity intact, even when every fiber of my being wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt me. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not exposing David's lies completely, if I think he deserved more consequences for what he did to me. Here's what I tell them. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't mean they didn't hurt you. It doesn't mean they deserve forgiveness. It doesn't mean you should stay or give them another chance. But it does mean you can choose how their actions shape your future. You can choose to become bitter and calculating, or you can choose to become wiser and stronger. You can choose revenge, or you can choose freedom. I chose freedom, and 15 pounds heavier or not, I've never felt more beautiful in my life. The difference between reasons and justifications isn't just semantic, it's the difference between understanding human nature and excusing human cruelty. David had reasons for what he did, but he had no justification, and neither would I if I'd chosen to destroy him in return. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to become the villain in your own story.